Good morning, everyone. Good morning. We have a very compelling agenda this morning, and we would like to begin the program promptly at 7:30. To that end, we would appreciate the cooperation of those who may still be networking by taking your seats. Thank you very much. Once again, good morning. My name is Noel Hasagawa. I'm the acting Deputy Executive Director and COO for the Port of Long Beach, and I will be serving as your Master of Ceremonies this morning. On behalf of the entire Port of Long Beach team, welcome to Pulse of the Ports. For those who are keeping track, this marks the 10th installment of our annual peak season forecast. And again this year, the Port is webcasting the event live. So all of you who are here, don't forget to smile. And for those who are watching and tuning in, our international cyber audience, greetings. It's another beautiful sunny day here in Long Beach. For those who'd like to watch later, at your convenience, you will find the archived video at polb.com/pulseports. This morning we have a stellar lineup of speakers, and I know we are all eagerly anticipating what they have to say. We'll get to them in just a moment. But first, join me in welcoming some special guests who are also here for our event. With us today is Assemblywoman Bonnie Lowenthal. Councilmember Patrick O'Donnell. Doug Otto, Long Beach City College Board of Trustees. Thank you all for being here. It is also my great pleasure to introduce to you the members of the Long Beach Board of Harbor Commissioners, the governing body for the Port of Long Beach. And I begin with Commission President Doug Drummond. President Drummond will be coming up in a moment to officially welcome us to this event. Vice President Rich Dines. Commissioner Dines is one of our panelists in today's program. I would also like to introduce Commissioner Susan Weiss. She's a 6-year commission veteran and 2-time past commission president. And also with us today is our newest harbor commissioner, Lorianne Farrell, whose financial acumen and public service experience has been a great addition to the board. Thanks to the commission, and thanks again to all of you for being here today. At this time, I would like to ask our Commission President, Doug Drummond, to please come forward for some remarks.
Thank you, Noel. Good morning. And on behalf of my fellow harbor commissioners, welcome to all of you, and welcome to those around the world that are with us online. I join Noel in thanking our speakers for their generous time and participation in this event, their willingness to share information that's critical to our industry and the supply chain. At the Port of Long Beach, we believe it's vital that we keep all of our customers informed. So let me begin with a brief update on our current activities. Our executive director search is well underway. We fully expect it to be completed in June. There's no doubt in my mind that we'll attract outstanding talent, and we will select a leader that will take us to even greater heights. But that's only one position. We've recently filled a number of positions at the highest level of the organization with people that came from the organization, people who have exhibited great talent and earned our respect in the trenches. It's great that we have that kind of depth in our organization. What a bench. We're also moving ahead with $4 billion in new construction. These massive projects will keep Long Beach competitive, and we watch every dollar as we move along. And I want to tell you too, from the bottom of my heart, we appreciate the people that we do business with. Thank you.
At this time, I'd like to invite Al Morrow, our acting executive director, to please come forward.
Thank you, President Drummond, and thank you, Noel. On behalf of the department staff, the Harbor Department staff, welcome. It's hard to believe this is the 10th Pulse of the Port event. Some of you out there may have attended most of them. Some may have attended all of them. In 2005, when we kicked this off, I don't know of any other organization or event where we got such a well-rounded, diverse view of the forecast of the supply chain, our industry. Until we launched that, people were on their own to try to plan and forecast their own opportunity, their own forecast in their cargo. What this event does is it allows us to step back and take a look and hear a different perspective from all the different people in our industry. Today, you're going to hear views from an economist, from a terminal operator, from a vessel operator, importer, exporter, the railroads, truckers, labor. It'll allow you to just take a step back and hear their perspective from their criteria, what they look at to plan their forecast. And very likely, and hopefully you'll hear things that'll confirm what you had been planning, but then again, maybe you'll hear some things that you didn't consider, and you'll be able to adjust and adapt your business to capitalize on what's ahead for us. So today, I'd like you to join me and thank this distinguished panel for their generosity in coming here and sharing their views. And I think we ought to just get this thing going. So Noel, if you'd please introduce the speakers. And thank you again.
Thank you, Al. Thank you, Al, and thanks again, President Drummond. Let me remind you that before the program concludes, there will be a Q&A session moderated by Bill Mongaluza from the Journal of Commerce. You can email your questions throughout the program to pulse@polb.com. That's pulse@polb.com. You can also tweet us at Port of Long Beach. Now, for the moment you've all been waiting for, we turn our attention to our distinguished panel. To start us off, our first panelist will give us a big picture view of the economy. And I don't know of anyone in our industry who can set the stage for our journey through the supply chain better than Dr. Walter Kempsey. As the chief economist for Moffatt Nichol, he directs and oversees the firm's studies, financial analyses, and global trade and economic trend forecasts as they pertain to investment in transportation infrastructure, particularly in the marine facilities area. He has led projects ranging from strategic development plans for ports through mergers and acquisitions to terminal operator expansion decisions. He is a seasoned global economist, having lived and worked in Europe, Latin America, and Asia, and we are so honored to welcome him back to Long Beach for Pulse of the Ports. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. Kempsey.
Thank you. Thank you for the very nice introduction. And as always, thanks to everyone here for the very warm reception. I can't imagine a better industry to work in than our industry, where 8 years ago I was taken in and educated by many of you to become part of the fabric of what moves freight, across our ports in the country. But time is short. We have a lot of really good speakers, so I'm going to jump into the talk and skip a lot of the intro comments, except to say a few things. The first is that the outlook for this year is, of course, driven by current conditions, but consumption behavior, buying things for consuming, that's not everything. We also spend a lot of time building for the future, building infrastructure, and that depends on what we think will come next. So the title today is The Outlook for 2014 and a little bit beyond, and I'll explain exactly why we want to look at it that way in a second. And as always, for full disclosure, I'm a port economist. I work in the industry, and everything that I will say today is a result of the projects that I get to work on. My firm designs the infrastructure on which our industry depends, and I have the privilege to work alongside the planners and engineers who make these things happen. And in a few words, I think pretty much my job is to make sure that if we build something, the freight will come. And if it doesn't come, it's not my fault. So So they're basically a mix of messages here, but the overall summary, and I'm going to go through, this is where I'm going to spend my time, and then I'm going to jump through a bunch of slides. I recommend you download the presentation from the Port of Long Beach and look at these charts that shape the thinking on your own, because there are quite a few, and I think if you get a chance to look at them and meditate on them a little bit, that might help you in doing your planning. But the mix here is essentially some good news, very good news, and some not so good news. So I'm going to start with the not so good news and get that out of the way. It's the third bullet that we have here. Our country's headed for stagflation. We have a lot of people who are going to retire, who haven't saved a lot of money, so they won't spend a lot of money. And even if they had a lot of money, they probably wouldn't buy a lot of goods. They'd spend most of it on services. Cruises, playing golf, doctors, going out to eat. So that doesn't really drive demand very strongly. And to be frank, we basically borrowed a lot of money. We haven't really earned much of a return on it. And we're not putting the money into the right things. And until we do, the outlook for the U.S. becomes less and less, positive in the long term. What's terrifically aggravating to people like me is the fact that it doesn't have to be that way. If we were to invest in infrastructure to support economic activity, in particular for exports like agriculture, and infrastructure in places like ports, and you don't have to look very far to see who's setting the example. The Port of Long Beach has been doing this all along. This is what we need on a much bigger scale. And because we're not doing it, the number of years before we get into some serious trouble, and there's nothing the Federal Reserve and other guys can do about this. You can raise and lower interest rates, it's not going to matter. In the end, you have to build the stuff and make it possible to move freight. So that's not so good. But before we get there, and that's in the long run, and as a well-known economist, John Keynes, once said, in the long run, we're all dead. Let's look at what's going on today. So 2014 has everything going for it. Yeah, we had some bad weather, but the bad weather is actually kind of good, because if you look at the share price behavior of some of the companies that provide home goods, particularly roofs for people in the Northeast, they're doing very well. We had some pretty nasty weather, that's where I live, and roofs collapsed, driveways got wrecked by plowing. It's a mess in the Northeast. It was a mess before the bad weather, now it's even worse. So besides having all the economic conditions coming together at the right time, the bad weather is going to force an awful lot of additional activity. Some of my fellow economists are just really, really, really bullish, and I hate to say this, but they're probably right. Anyways, the question is, what else besides the U.S.? Because the U.S. is driving the global recovery. And the answer is, Europe is finally getting back on its feet. Japan is doing the same. And the CRIB countries, China, Russia, India, and Brazil, these are the countries that are underdeveloped, previously called the BRIC countries, but it turns out they weren't very BRIC-like, so now we call them the CRIB. And they're developing, they're doing well, except, it takes a while to become, a fully mature, developed, industrialized country. And as soon as Europe and the US are chugging along a little better, they'll do pretty well. So what does this tell us? We think imports are going to be very strong this year, better than exports. In the long run, we hope exports will do better than imports because we have to pay for our imports. The next big thing to create volatility for us is rising interest rates. It's going to change lots of things. People are going to want to look at air freight again and get things away from the sea and back to the air. The inventory to sales ratios are too high. We have to cut the cost of carrying inventory. Companies can't raise their prices much because we don't pay workers a lot of money in this country. You can't cut costs any further because we've already cut it to the bone. So the last place to save money will be on inventory, so expect a lot of efforts to increase the speed at which freight moves. So that will create some volatility for us, some congestion and lots of complaining, but it's a much better problem to have than excess capacity, so be happy about it. What could go wrong with this picture? The Fed did some pretty extreme things to pull us away from going into a Great Depression. And now they have to undo that, but they have to undo it without putting us back into a recession, but not too slowly, because if they go too slowly, we'll end up with an awful lot of inflation. And I think Janet Yellen is the right person for the job, and I am only moderately concerned about it. Actually, maybe not even moderately. But nonetheless, the economist you want to listen to this year is Janet Yellen. Basically, it's up to the Fed to make sure things work. So let's run through some pictures. Why did the economy collapse and get into so much trouble? This chart shows you the debt-to-income ratio for U.S. households. We got to 130% debt to income. It's ridiculous. The little line below shows you where we should have been. So we had a credit bubble and it blew up. On average, it takes 7 to 10 years to recover from that. We blew up in 2006, 2007. It's been about 7 years. Okay, so we're at the dawn of getting past recovery. How do we get out of this mess? We transferred the debt. This chart here shows government debt and government debt to GDP ratio. And we transferred the debt from the private sector to the public sector. We bailed out the investment banks in Wall Street. We bailed out homeowners. And we helped a couple of car companies. If we hadn't done that, this could have been like the 1930s. In fact, that's exactly where we were headed. So we don't have 25% unemployment, but folks, economists talk about opportunity costs. Nothing comes for free. You want to get out of having a depression, you're not going to get a free solution. Now we have a lot of government debt, and it has to be paid. Where did a lot of this problem come from? It's the Federal Reserve. This is a chart of interest rates going back 60 years. I put in blue line the interest rate the Fed controls, the overnight rate, and the orange line is the U.S. 10-year interest rate. It's the interest rate in government securities. It's the benchmark that sets interest rates for car loans, for mortgages, and many other things, not only in the U.S., but in the rest of the world. And the Fed, with that blue line, whipped things around all over the place. After 9/11, it cut interest rates dramatically. Then we had a bubble start, so they raised interest rates dramatically. They blew up the bubble. The economy started to collapse, and they cut interest rates to zero in the short term. We've never seen that in all of the years since the Federal Reserve was established. What a mess. Then that wasn't good enough. So they went and started buying lots of government bonds in order to push interest rates down. And there is a lot of money out there that has to be pulled out of the economy. But did it work? And the answer is, yeah, it did. This chart shows you the little red line is employment in the U.S. We really lost a lot of jobs very quickly. Household spending really collapsed. Interest rate sensitive things like home purchases and cars, as you can see, fell off a cliff. But in the last 4 or 5 years, we've recovered. And if I'm right, as of June of this year, employment in the U.S. will be back to where it was in December of 2007. About 7 years to being recovered. Now, what happens beyond that depends on us investing in infrastructure and supporting the industries that can drive the economy. And that's what I would basically call that the ACE. Agriculture, capital goods, and energy, ACE. Those are the 3 industries that should drive this business cycle. And that's important to me because I have a scorecard. There's 4 phases to the business cycle. I use 4 different scorecards, one for each of them. We're still in a recovery phase. This is the scorecard for that recovery, and basically for the recovery phase. And as you look through the list, it's either black or green. There are no red marks there, and it says that we are poised for a lot of good performance. It also says that we are going to see interest rates rise, and as interest rates rise, that will create a lot of push to reduce inventory holdings. But just a quick aside here, this is U.S. container volume trade. Last year, imports and exports grew 2 to 3%, roughly in the range that we had forecast last year. This year, I trimmed the numbers. The model says much more than 7%. I don't like the model. That's too big of a number. So you have these ranges that we put here. And if Ken Uriel brings me back next year, you can either say good job or what were you thinking? But I was a little nervous about the big numbers the model threw out, so I trimmed them back, and this is what I believe. This is the effect of the United States and the rest of the world. The blue line is global GDP. The red line is U.S. GDP. Up until 2001 or so, the U.S. led the world economy. Then it broke apart when China, Russia, India, Brazil, the Carib countries built a lot of infrastructure and made their economies look like they were growing a lot, but they weren't. And everything collapsed, as you can see. then they try to break away again, but the truth is America is the dominant economy in the world, and if the US is doing well, so does the rest of the world. In 10 years, it'll be a different story, but this is not 2024. This is 2014, so basically everybody that I speak to in the US and abroad is concerned about the US, and I think the US is doing fine. The rest of the world will do well too. But the new thing for our industry is rising interest rates. This is the long-term trend in inventory to sales ratio. We are well above trend. We should be much lower. And I think there is going to be huge demand for speed. Slow steaming, those kind of things. Talk to the liners about that. All I can tell you is that I think we hold too much inventory. We could be far more efficient. And that's where all the focus is going to be this year and the next, particularly if inflation takes off and interest rates go up. Interest rates are a key driver of inventory costs, so if interest rates go up, cut your inventory if you want to keep your costs down. This is what happens beyond 2014. This is the curve. I like to show this a lot, of the number of people turning 65 each year from the year 1900 projected to 2050. It's a gray tsunami. And it tells you that we're going to have slower growth expectations in the future. I disclosed the author's profile here as well, so that there's, I like to say a lot of bad things about the effect of this wave on the economy, and I'm one of those guys who's going to help slow things down in a few years. China recognized this. China's share of U.S. imports had grown a lot. It's been declining. China is now focused on selling things to its own population. Mexico and Southeast Asia are stepping up to take place. It's an early trend. Whether China slows down and it goes to the Southeast Asia or South Asia or Mexico, I can't really tell you. But this chart here shows you wages in many countries, and it shows that South Asia is very cheap and it's a very attractive location. Mexico is fighting back. If it's Mexico, it's not so good for Southern California. If it is South Asia, you will still have a problem because since the Panama Canal expansion has been delayed, the liners have started moving services to routes that take them through the Suez Canal. And what we expect the West Coast in the US to do is to really upgrade capacity to handle very, very large vessels and thus remain competitive. And that should be the outlook for the industry in the West Coast. Finally, we need to focus on exports. The yellow line is the emerging markets GDP growth. The red line is for countries like US and Europe. We want to sell to these guys. I have a list here that you can look at later. These are the things we are really good at producing and we should be exporting, but I don't see enough infrastructure in the country for the US to be very competitive. There are pockets where we are, like this port, but it's not widespread enough. And basically that's it. It looks good for this year. It looks good a little bit into next year. Beyond that, we better start focusing not on interest rate policy, but on funding infrastructure improvements. And thank you for your time.
Dr. Kemses, thank you once again for your excellent presentation. You gave us so much in so little time. Among the things that I heard is a new acronym, ACE, A-C-E, the need for speed, and the fact that you'll be turning 65 pretty soon. So congratulations. I'm impressed with that ability, and now that we have the economic backdrop, we're next going to hear about inbound cargo. It's my great pleasure to welcome Bruce Carlton. Bruce is the president and CEO of the National Industrial Transportation League, or NIT League. Founded in 1907, NIT League is the nation's oldest and largest national association representing shippers in both domestic and international commerce with over 500 member companies. Bruce has more than 40 years of experience in domestic and international freight transportation. He joined the NIT League after having served at the U.S. Department of Transportation. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Bruce Carlton.
Noel, thank you very much. If you do the math very quickly, 40 years doing this type of work, you can tell that I'm already part of that gray tsunami. Now I at least know how I can refer to myself. So But it's a very, excuse me, it's a very real part of what's going on in America, and I think Walter did us a favor to point that out in particular. I'm going to be brief this morning. I'm with the Knit League. It's been my privilege to serve as their president for 6 years. Previously, I had a long career in the Maritime Administration. I've been doing maritime and ports and ships for most of my adult life, and it's wonderful to be here in the Port of Long Beach to just share some observations. The League was founded in 1907, as Noel said. It's the oldest and the largest association representing shippers, importers, exporters, and a lot of people who never actually cross the border. They move their goods between the states by truck and rail, but we do have a tremendous interest on what's happening in the world of import and export trade and what is happening in America's ports, and in particular here in Southern California and Long Beach. Who are these importers? I mean, we all know the big box stores, the big retailers, they jump out on line one. Line two, the big multinational manufacturers, auto companies, et cetera, bringing sub-assemblies and parts, engine components in from foreign countries for final assembly in the United States. But also, we forget sometimes that it's also the small business owners in your own hometowns and communities who are really depending on that, that seamless flow of product coming in from sources around the world. They have a lot of common characteristics regardless of their size, and part of that common characteristic is that they need a seamless, uninterrupted flow of goods. Secondly, they all face very severe pricing constraints. They are all under tremendous pressure to reduce cost. I think we got some moderately positive news coming from Walter on the future of the American economy. I feel better this morning about it, but we don't have the heat of the last before the recession. So we're on a steady rise, but the revenue is not pouring into these companies, and what they are watching very, very closely is the cost of moving goods and how can they force greater reductions in that cost. They are reminded, supply chain people, logistics people are reminded every day by their bosses that they do not make money for their companies. They spend the company's money. They are a cost center. So the pressure is on them to keep that cost down. Every link in their supply chain is tested. Every link is stress tested. They're tested on the basis of performance, on reliability, and of course, cost. And not every link is going to pass those stress tests. So what about the Port of Long Beach? What about what's going on here? I can tell you from our observation, from the companies that I have the privilege of representing, we see that you are doing a really fine job. I've had the privilege of being here several times recently. I see what you're doing, and it's really quite remarkable. The port clearly has a vision. The port clearly has a plan to achieve that vision, and they're taking direct actions to fulfill the vision. I was here 3 weeks ago and had the opportunity, thanks to my friend Ken, for touring the harbor on the water side. And I was a host for a number of foreign visitors. They were blown away. They were blown away. The work that's being done at the Middle Harbor, seeing a 13,000 TEU container ship being worked in real time, the success of the Clean Trucks program, the green initiatives, all of this is working, I think, to establish Long Beach as a place where importers and exporters can do business and do business here comfortably. And shouldn't forget the Gerald Desmond Bridge, a small project of lifting a bridge. The vision is for high performance, and the actions that you're taking are going to achieve that high performance. And last night, I had the privilege of meeting with your port commissioners and the senior executive management staff. You really are in good hands. These people really do understand the importance of the port, what this does to the local economy, what it means to people who live and work here. You have a great team in place. But what are the near-term stress tests? As I said, every element of a supply chain is tested. And what is it about this place that shippers, importers, and exporters are looking at? I'm going to talk about three. There's probably plenty. I'm only going to mention three, and sort of in ascending order of what you can do about it, what you can impact locally and have an effect on. And if you'll, I'll start with my first one. If you'll pardon the overworked expression, the elephant in the room, not this room, don't worry, but the elephant in the room is the upcoming ILWU-PMA labor negotiation. There's no getting around it, and very bluntly, my message this morning is that shippers are on edge. They're watching, they're nervous. Some of them I have spoken with, and some of them are absolutely today making contingency plans and mapping alternative routings in case things don't go well. They really don't have a project, an alternative to taking on these types of stress testing. Everybody understands, pardon me, everybody understands that there's a certain amount of theater engaged and involved. Everybody knows that there'll be non-negotiable demands and some fist pounding. We are all negotiators in our own line of business. We all know that you have to get down to the business, though, of solving the problems at some point. And the message, if I can leave a single message, is shippers, your importers and exporters, moving that freight across the dock right now, they really would like to see those talks start now. Get serious about it, have the theater, do the screaming and the ranting and the raving, and then get down to it and solve the problems, figure out what the next contract is going to look like. Hopefully it will be a long-term contract. I have a lot of friends in the maritime industry. I have a lot of friends in the maritime labor movement. And to a person, their remarks to me are, Bruce, I hope the contract is long enough that I'm not here for the next one. The second issue is one that I think is going to change the industry. It's going to change operations here and many other places. And that, excuse me, I'm sorry, the emergence of the new mega alliances. We all saw something coming. We all knew something had to change. The business model in the container ship industry was not sustainable, is not sustainable. You cannot have a collection of huge global companies losing that much money year on year without some change. But what does it mean for shippers? What does it mean for ports and terminal operators? What does it mean for longshore workers? A lot of that is unknown and undecided at the moment. We're watching, we're testing, we're carefully observing. People want to know, how does it affect me? Is my cargo going to be dropped off on the right day? Will the rail and truck interface work as well as the ships get bigger and the calls get dispersed in ways that are different from past patterns? You know, I think there's a lot of people are light on their feet, are able to move and adapt, but these changes are going to be rather dramatic, and it would be inappropriate for me not to mention my thanks to Chairman Mario Cordero for bringing together a majority 4-to-1 vote at the Federal Maritime Commission to say to the P3 partners, go ahead and launch this, but we want to know what you're doing. We want to watch what you're doing. We want to know and understand the impacts. Shippers want the cargo delivered, but they want absolute guarantees of independent pricing, a firewall between these carriers to make sure that they are negotiating one-on-one and not negotiating with all three at the same time in the same place. They have given every assurance that they will do that, and I know them to be honorable, and they will do that. But there's sort of a Ronald Reagan approach here of trust but verify. And shippers are very comfortable with that. And again, Mr. Chairman, thank you for doing that work. I know you have a lot of pressures in that job, but we appreciate what you have done. Lastly, one item that you can't do a darn thing about, and I can't do a darn thing about, but it's worth mentioning. There is a real rise in protectionism. There is an anti-trade philosophy in the lowlands. We need to be on guard for that. We need a new Trans-Pacific trade agreement. The Doha round, which has only been going on most of my lifetime, they're not rushing to get to a conclusion or any conclusion that's going to be beneficial for American trade. We need fast-track authority in the Congress. We need to keep pushing our elected leaders to get this done and to authorize the trade representative to go forward and negotiate and get some good trade deals for the United States. We need to be on guard, let people know. Call your congressman or congresswoman. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bruce, and very well done. And just so you know, the nice sunny day was ordered just for you. The focus of our next panelist is on exports. At a time when the U.S. is focusing on increasing overall exports, who better to address the subject than our next speaker? Antoine Griffin joined the U.S. Department of Commerce International Trade Administration in 2012 as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Domestic Operations. Prior to joining the ITA, he served as Senior Advisor for Field Operations for the U.S. Small Business Administration and honed his skills over a decade working on high-profile political campaigns. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Antoine Griffin.
Good morning, and thank you for the kind introduction, Noel. So I bring you all greetings from Washington, D.C., where yesterday upon my departure, the streets were teeming with thousands of school children on their spring break. You're there in Washington to enjoy, obviously, the monuments, all of the great museums, including the Smithsonian, and probably, late March, early April snowfall as well. So it is certainly good to be here in Long Beach amongst you all in the sunny weather, so thank you. So we've long cooperated with the San Pedro Bay ports, given our mutual interest in supporting and increasing export trade. And it's certainly my pleasure to address you here today. But before I begin, I'd like to extend another thanks to Acting Executive Director and Deputy Executive Directors Al Morrow and Noel Hasagaba, Gina Barrow and Don Snyder of the Trade Development Unit, and Ken Uriu, who obviously worked really hard and was instrumental in helping arrange for me to be here. Thank you also to all of the harbor commissioners who I had an opportunity to meet with last night, my fellow speakers, and to all of you here in the audience, here in person, and certainly watching via live stream. It's great to be here in Long Beach, and today's event is timely. In fact, this year marks the 20th anniversary of the opening of our first U.S. Export Assistance Center in the country, established here in Long Beach at the World Trade Center back in 1994. As you all know, the greater LA Long Beach region, including Orange County, is the largest manufacturing center in the country. In fact, this metropolitan statistical area leads all counties in the U.S. in terms of manufacturing jobs, payroll, and establishment. So it's not surprising that you have the busiest port complex in the country right here. In 2012, the LA Long Beach, Orange County metropolitan area was the third largest export market in the United States and accounted for roughly 42% of California's merchandise exports. Now, when it comes to supporting jobs, international trade is the largest industry in the metro area by employment, representing nearly 300,000 jobs directly, and probably 3 times that indirectly through the support of retail, manufacturing, and other sectors. In addition to the activities here within the Port of Long Beach supports trade and jobs as operators of Foreign Trade Zone 50, which covers most of LA County and Orange County. Exports through the Port of Long Beach take our goods throughout the world via over 140 shipping lines, with the top export sectors and markets as follows: computer and electronic parts going to Mexico, transportation equipment largely going to Canada, various manufactured commodities to China, chemical exports to Japan, and machinery and electrical equipment to South Korea. What we know at the Department of Commerce is that exports are the engine of our national economy. And much of the work we are doing at the International Trade Administration is in support of the President's National Export Initiative and Secretary Penny Pritzker's Open for Business agenda. What we know is 95% of the world's consumers live outside of our borders. And the U.S. is now selling more goods and services to these consumers than at any other time in our country's history. Since the launch of the President's National Export Initiative in 2010, the U.S. experienced 4 consecutive years of record export growth, including nearly $2.3 trillion last year in 2013. Also in 2013, every $1 billion of U.S. exports supported nearly 5,600 jobs. Exports are driving a record 13.5% of our economy, which means more American goods and services are reaching foreign markets. The administration has made it a top priority to improve the conditions that directly affect the private sector's ability to export, including working to remove trade barriers abroad, helping firms of all sizes overcome hurdles to entering new markets, and also, most importantly, assisting with financing. In addition, we have renewed and revitalized our efforts to promote American exports abroad. There have been 1.3 million new jobs created since the NEI was launched, and nearly 10 million jobs in the U.S. are currently supported by exports. I'll say that again. Nearly 10 million jobs here in the U.S. are supported by exports. But most importantly, the NEI has started an important shift to integrating exports into the DNA of U.S. business. A primary focus of the National Export Initiative is to enforce trade agreement compliance. The U.S. has currently 20 free trade agreements with 20 trading partners, which support 46% of total U.S. goods and service exports. The most recent of those FTAs include ones with Colombia, Panama, and South Korea. Indeed, Long Beach has benefited from these existing trade agreements, as we saw in 2012, where the region exported roughly $27 billion of material to the NAFTA region, representing 36% of the area's merchandise exports. Now, there are 3 particular things I want to bring your attention to in terms of forecasting. One is our Look South campaign, where we at the department are encouraging all of the exporters and traders that we work with to utilize Mexico, one of our FTA partners, as a platform to entering the growing Central and South American markets. The second, another ACE, I know that previous speakers have mentioned the acronym, which is our Automated Commercial Environment, or our single window, where we're looking to have trade facilitation intended to drastically cut the time and money involved with moving your goods and services abroad. This single window where we're looking to, in effect, streamline all of the approval processes, everything from customs declarations, certificates of origin, all of those forms, for lack of a better term, forms and permits from our Department of Homeland Security. We're going to move all of those into one single place, so that it greatly reduce the cost of doing business and moving and getting approvals to move containers abroad. And third, our Asia pivot and Africa expansion. At the department, we're making investments to get more of our commercial staff into the growing Asia-Pacific region and Sub-Saharan Africa, which we expect to be the world's fastest growing economies over the course of the next few years. Now, one thing you may not know is that our U.S. Commercial Service has offices in more than 100 U.S. cities across the U.S. and U.S. embassies and consulates in more than 70 foreign countries. Our staff stands ready to assist manufacturers and service providers in helping them navigate international opportunities for their goods and services. We do this primarily through export counseling, international business-to-business matchmaking, and a range of other services, including facilitating trade missions and U.S. exhibition at trade shows and events abroad. Of course, Long Beach is unique in that we have local offices to support you both here in Los Angeles and Orange County that help to serve the region, but also nearby in San Diego, the Inland Empire, in Central and Northern California as well. Before I close, I'd like to mention that this year at ITA, we've launched a nationwide series of high-profile export conferences called Discover Global Markets. We'll host the Discover Global Markets Conference later this year in Los Angeles on June 3rd and 4th, with a specific focus on helping businesses sell into the European market. During the conference, area businesses will have the opportunity to meet with our trade diplomats from throughout Europe, while also benefiting from the latest market intelligence and networking opportunities. We encourage businesses to register for the conference and learn more by going to our website at export.gov/Discover Global Markets, or by talking to any of our international trade specialists at any of our offices here in Southern California. Again, I'd like to thank you again for your time, and thank you for your commitment to increasing the value and volume of U.S. exports here in Long Beach, but throughout the country as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Antoine, and the efforts of your department and your efforts personally are duly noted and much appreciated in improving conditions for exports. And the Port of Long Beach certainly enjoys the wonderful relationship we have with your staff here in the local offices. Now it's time to turn our attention to ocean carriers and marine terminal operators. This year, the panelists providing this perspective brings a unique point of view. For this stop on the supply chain, it's a real pleasure to welcome one of our own, a Long Beach resident, a practicing lawyer in our fair city for many years, an 8-year member of the Long Beach Board of Harbor Commissioners, a Dodgers fan. Oh, wait, I just snuck that in there. Our next speaker was nominated by President Obama to serve on the Federal Maritime Commission and confirmed by the Senate in 2011. Following 2 years of service as a commissioner, President Obama named him FMC chairman last year. The FMC's mission is to foster a fair, efficient, and reliable international ocean transportation system while protecting the public from unfair and deceptive practices. It's a big job, and who better for it? Please welcome Federal Maritime Commission Chairman Mario Cordero.
Thank you very much, Noel, for that kind introduction. And I'm an avid Dodger fan. With that, you've had some great presentations. Dr. Kemsey's, you talk about bad weather. Let's talk about Washington, D.C., which I will be going back this afternoon. And believe me, I enjoy my stay here in Long Beach in what I call paradise in terms of weather. As Antoine mentioned, exports is a big thing for our nation. That's certainly the focus of the FMC, and should be the focus of everybody in this industry. Again, when you talk about the number of jobs, 10 million, and the jobs that we still need to strive for, I think that's the utmost priority with regard to what our nation needs to do. Ken Euro, thank you. I'm going to try to keep this to 10 minutes. I know you sent me a text late last night with an exclamation mark. I will do that, I promise you. In fact, I'm going to take my watch off right now to make sure. President Drummond, thank you very much for your leadership and your introduction. And Bruce, thank you for your acknowledgement, Bruce Carlton. And more specifically, Bruce mentioned something that I think should be very important to everybody in this room about the great Port of Long Beach, the great commission, and the great staff. And I think it's, for me, great to hear Bruce mention this as an outsider, so to speak, non-Long Beach resident, and part of a very important trade group, how they see the Port of Long Beach. Because I think sometimes we've seen some press articles that have unfortunately kind of misinformed the perspective of what we have in Long Beach from some people's opinion. But the fact is, as Bruce mentioned, it is a great port, it is a great city, it is a great commission, and it has a great staff. So before my prepared comments, I would ask you here to give a great round of applause to the Port of Long Beach. Now moving to my formal comments and see if I can operate this thing correctly. There we go. A little bit about the FMC. As you can see, we're started in 1961, independent regulatory agency. And as Noel mentioned, we have a mission, and I believe the FMC has as great a staff as the Port of Long Beach in accomplishing this mission with regard to our mandate. These are the relevant statutes that, with regard to our regulatory perspective and mandate. And again, it's been an honor for me to be part of this process. And let me just lastly say about the Port of Long Beach. But for my involvement on this great commission, I'm very blessed to the fact that the reason I'm at the FMC and the president appointed me as chairman is because that's how this nation sees the Port of Long Beach in terms of the quality of people that we have here. Next, there's the mission that Noel made reference to. As indicated, strive for a fair, efficient, reliable ocean transportation system. And at the same time, this balance of protecting the American shipper with regard to unfair practices. And that is a tough balance at times to try to adjust to. But nevertheless, I think it's a great mission and a great agency. Bruce also mentioned the whole question about where we're going in terms of the model of the industry alliances. And this is going to be the topic of my presentation here. As evidenced by recent agreements that have been filed establishing global operational networks through vessel sharing alliances, such as the P3 and the G6, it is clear that the container shipping industry is undergoing a shift that will affect all phases of the supply logistics. And here you see a little commentary in terms of how we see and we oversee the agreements, which I believe is a valuable mandate that we need to have for this country. Increasing concerns for the global environment and rapid improvements in technology have led to the introduction of larger and more fuel-efficient vessels, delivering environmental and slot cost efficiencies that were unheard of 10 years ago. When I was at the Port of Long Beach, and in fact I was on this stage about 7 years ago at this event, we were talking about 5,000 TEU vessels. And at that point, I believe OOCL came in with an 8,000 TEU vessel. Now we're talking about 12, 14. It's just an amazing trend of where we're going with regard to the shipping or the carrier industry. These efficiencies, however, come at a price. The amount of cargo required to fill these vessels may necessitate certain operational cooperation, and namely alliances. As a result, we have seen the filing of these types of operational agreements, such as the P3, with the Commission seeking limited antitrust immunity. Now, the operating statute, when we look at these agreements, is 6G of the Shipping Act. And that basically lays out for you what we, the Commission, look to when we look at some of these agreements. Limited antitrust immunity has long been provided to certain members of the ocean shipping industry. The purpose of this immunity has been to ensure a stable and dependable ocean transportation network, allowing for the United States for vigorous participation in vital international trade. Under this statute, 6G of the Shipping Act, the Federal Maritime Commission has a responsibility for reviewing any filed agreements to determine if they are likely to reduce competition, to produce an unreasonable reduction in transportation service, or an unreasonable increase in transportation costs. Historically, carriers have taken advantage of this immunity by filing agreements that would allow them to discuss and agree on ocean rates. Over the past 10 years, however, carriers have been entering into many more operational agreements involving the sharing of vessels or vessel space. These operational agreements, filed with the FMC, come in a variety of forms. At their simplest, one carrier might file an agreement that allows it to charter space from another carrier on an existing service, either in exchange for slots or payment. Perhaps two carriers might agree to introduce a new service stream cooperatively, reducing the risk of either carrier individually. These examples represent the operational agreements that have few, if any, negative or competitive effects. They allow for carriers to expand their service being offered to shippers with the objective of cost savings. However, the operational agreements may ultimately mean less capacity in a market and fewer calls by vessels and/or at ports. These agreements can apply to a single trade or across the globe and may range from a few weeks in duration to a decade or more. All of these factors taken into account when the Commission is reviewing the likely competitive impact of these agreements and ultimately will inform the Commission's determination as to whether an agreement likely will result in an unreasonable increase in transportation costs or an unreasonable decrease in transportation service. In the case of the global alliances that we have been much talked about here recently, the Commission, from perspective, we must balance the potential benefits of the cost savings and environmental efficiencies that come from the coordinated deployment of newer, larger, with the vessel's potential harm that could come from concentrating on decision-making power in terms of port coverage and sailing schedules and necessary capacity in the appropriate trade lanes. This is particularly relevant as we prepare for the upcoming peak season, when adequate capacity, particularly in a vital trans-Pacific trade route, is of utmost importance. And here we have, basically, I've made reference to the container vessels that we're having at this point, seen in the global market here. And the next slide should be, these are the alliances that we are now looking to. In reviewing the competitive impact of global alliances, we examined the change in capacity that will result from realignment of previously independently operative service strings and how those capacity changes might affect shippers given such current market conditions. But our primary concern is, given this cooperation among compelling entities, will the market remain competitive? The answer to these questions may not be clear in the short term. Now again, this indicates to you the percentages of the market here in terms of the Trans-Pacific and the Asian-Europe trade route. But overall, it is clear that in the container shipping market, the answer is preliminary yes, particularly in the Trans-Pacific. There remains enough competing carriers that even with the arrival of the P3 and the proposed G6 alliance, the unilateral actions to restrict capacity during peak season and activity, which could directly increase rates, seems rather remote. We note that even with the P3 and the proposed G6 alliances, carriers are free to pursue their own growth strategies and introduce new capacity if rates are sufficiently beneficial. These factors and the prospect of continued overcapacity well into 2015 is a picture of a vigorously competitive liner market for U.S. importers and exporters and the American shipping industry. We do note, however, that market conditions are subject to change. And I remind everyone that unlike any other regulatory agency, the FMC can make a determination that an agreement possesses no immediate threat to the ocean transportation industry when it is filed, yet we may still take steps to monitor, and this is something I want to stress here, to monitor the behavior of the parties with regard to that agreement and its impact on the industry on an ongoing basis. The Commission has the ability, and in fact has implemented that, to have or require special reporting requirements when we have specific concerns, as recently applied to the P3 alliance. The Commission can also seek to enjoin an agreement at any point if it is found to have produced substantially anti-competitive effects. And last, I will say that the Commission prides on our ability to stay connected to the constituents and to address any concerns that arise quickly and efficiently. The container transportation industry continues to change and evolve every day, and we are constantly working to stay abreast of these developments in order to take into account as we work towards a fair, efficient, and reliable ocean transportation system and to protect the public from unfair and deceptive practices. And again, in conclusion, I like to basically, where's Ken Enru? I kept it within 10 minutes, just like we did on the Commission at the Port of Long Beach, on time and under budget. But then again, I will just close by simply saying, go Dodgers, go Long Beach, And thank you very much for this opportunity to present this, especially in my present position. And again, I will never, ever forget, when people say, don't ever forget where you came from. I came from the Port of Long Beach Commission, and that's why I'm here today in this position. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman Cordero, and we certainly appreciate that unique perspective that you bring on the ocean carrier side of things, and thank you again. And Ken is looking at me and he's saying, yeah, it was about 10 minutes. I want to remind the audience, especially those who are viewing from their homes, you are encouraged to submit questions for the Q&A session that will follow the final panelist. You can submit your questions via email to pulse@polb.com. That's pulse@polb.com. I might also mention that I noticed walk in one of our California Transportation Commissioners, Fran Inman, who's here. So thank you for being here, Fran. Our next perspective is that of a port, the very hub of all this trade activity that we've been hearing about this morning. Our next speaker is a Marine clerk with the ILWU, bringing more than 15 years of experience on the waterfront to his position as Vice President of the Long Beach Harbor Commission. He has been actively involved with long-range efforts to improve efficiency and productivity at the port. In fact, he chairs the Harbor Commission's Port Productivity Subcommittee, along with Commissioner Susan Weiss. He is a champion for the use of alternative energy at the port, and under his leadership, the Port of Long Beach adopted a groundbreaking energy policy in 2013. Throughout his maritime career, he has also provided strong leadership in efforts to increase collaboration among business groups, labor organizations, and government agencies to advance port-related issues. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Harbor Commission Vice President Rich Dines.
Thank you, Noel. Good morning, everyone. First, I want to thank everyone for attending this morning. It's good to see so many people engaged in our port. And thank you to all the panelists for helping us draw such a large crowd. And lastly, I think I need to thank my beautiful wife, Yolita, because she stayed up late last night fine-tuning my speech. So if it doesn't go well, she's sitting off to the left over there. In my opinion, our industry, let me just say, I think Chairman Cordero was told it was 5 minutes. So originally, he planned for 5, so he did good. He got it at 10. In my opinion, our industry will change a lot in 2014. I think there's going to be a shuffling of the deck, but I believe that the Port of Long Beach will remain the premier seaport in North America. Our talented staff is proactively addressing every challenge we face, and I thank them for their hard work. Other ports are taking a wait-and-see approach, and for those that are going to be reactive to change, time is going to pass them by. For my presentation, I will talk about some of the big things we're working on at the port and where we need to go in the coming years. At the Port of Long Beach, we're a landlord port, and we lease out our terminals to tenants that specialize in stevedoring and terminal operations. The port's impacted trade largely by how we build our infrastructure, whether it be waterways, our terminals, and our miles of rail and roadways. Today, I want to talk about how we actually operate. And in recent years, we've seen that we, the Board of Harbor Commissioners and port staff, can play an important role with planning and collaboration. President Drummond, as Noel said, has appointed Commissioner Susan Weiss and I to serve on a subcommittee looking at how to improve terminal productivity. We'll be looking at how to improve on-dock rail utilization, next-generation rail, and truck turn times by facilitating discussion among all the involved stakeholders. One goal is to increase our usage of on-dock rail from the current 22% of our volume to 35% in the coming years. And this is really important because the community has asked us for more on-dock rail. More on-dock rail means less trucks on the street. For every container we load on a train in a terminal, that's one less container trying to leave on the back of a truck, through a congested container yard, out a crowded gate, and on city streets. To achieve that goal, we need to eliminate bottlenecks and increase staging and storage areas. And we have plans for over $1 billion in rail improvement projects. The key project is our Pier B on-dock rail support facility and we're currently working on the environmental impact report. With the trucks, we're focused on the container chassis. In the United States, ocean carriers traditionally have provided chassis to truckers. Ocean carriers own them, and they've provided them free at terminals. This is the only country in the world that's had this model. So the European and Asian models are much different. And following the recent recession, there's been a lot more cost-cutting and a reevaluating of the existing chassis model. Now, we need a better, more efficient chassis model, and I'm confident that we can create one that will allow our port to be more competitive. We've formed a stakeholders group that includes representatives of the ocean carriers, the marine terminal operators, labor, trucking companies, our Class 1 railroads, our beneficial cargo owners, and of course, both of the ports here in the San Pedro Bay. The group is leaning towards a gray fleet that allows chassis to be used interchangeably for all transactions. Now, they won't be painted gray, but they won't care what color the container is on their back. So you can take a chassis from one terminal to another and not have to move it back and forth according to what container it needs to carry. This will also reduce pollution. It'll reduce less truck traffic in our port. The group is finalizing its recommendations, and they're ready to issue its finding in the coming weeks. Equipment availability, storage, and maintenance repair are some of the key considerations that will be brought forward in the recommendations. Now, with ships, the California Air Resources Board has mandated that this year 50% of all the container and passenger vessels calling on our port must be plugged into shore power. The air quality improvements will be substantial. At the Port of Long Beach, we've spent $175 million in the last 6 years electrifying our berths to be in compliance. Recently, the port was awarded $30 million in state grants. I see Bonnie Lowenthal over there. Thank you, Bonnie. To offset the construction costs. To qualify for the state grants, we have committed to go above and beyond the 50% plug-in commitment, and we will reach 60%. We want to be sure our vessel operators have choices. So Long Beach has taken the lead in advancing technologies that will improve alternatives to shore power. And what you have there is a picture of our Amex unit that is now barge mounted. This was taken yesterday. The port is providing $2 million in funding to the South Coast Air Quality Management District for the demonstration of the Advanced Maritime Emissions Control System, or AMEX, and that's that barge mounted system that captures nearly 100% of emissions from the stack on the vessel. And the California Air Resources Board is very impressed with the shoreside testing and has conditionally awarded AMEX approval as an alternative technology to shore power. And what that means is we can hook up this AMEX system to every vessel that comes in our port, not just container and not just passenger, because those are only half of the vessels. We'll be able to hook this machine up to tankers, to bulk cargo, to ro-ro cargo. Every ship that comes in our port, we can capture 100% of the emissions. This is an incredible breakthrough, and it started here in Long Beach. The final condition is that 200 hours of testing are done on the barge-mounted unit, and the great news is I think on April 12th is when we hook it up to our first vessel. As you can imagine, our energy use is growing. The San Pedro Bay Ports Complex spends more than $50 million a year in electricity between both ports. And because of the electrification of more cargo handling equipment and the plugging in of ships to shore power, energy use could quadruple by 2030. And we all know the rates are going to go up. And even with our new negotiated discounts from Southern California Edison, which should equal about $350 million in discounts in the next 25 years, we still expect to see a steady increase in electricity costs in the coming decades. And last year, our commissioners adopted a port energy policy, which I call our Blue Port policy, because in 2005, Mario Cordero and his commission adopted the Green Port policy. So blue equals energy, so now we have blue and green. The goals of the policy, though, is to reduce costs on our tenants and our other customers, where they made a large commitment when we went with the Green Port policy and they bought new clean trucks. The goal is not to cost them $1 billion, but save them $1 billion. And we need to work for sustainable energy sources and increased energy security and resiliency. Just as today's peak season forecast will help us with our near-term planning, we're also revisiting our long-term forecast so we can update our land use. As Chairman Cordero talked about how big the vessels are, vessels are more than twice the size they were 10 years ago. So we need to take a real close look at where we need to go in the future. And we'll be looking at our fiscal requirements, our community impacts, our economic benefits, and the regional transportation system impacts as well. Our cargo forecasts and our plan development components, those will be prepared independent of each other. Finally, we need continued support from the federal government. The port supports establishing a dedicated funding for a discretionary grant program for regionally and nationally significant freight infrastructure projects, such as the Gerald Desmond Bridge, the I-710 corridor, and the next generation of rail. And I have my own ace here. Alameda Corridor East. We need to complete the Alameda Corridor. The Alameda Corridor took created 200 grade separations. So there were 200 at-grade crossings where trains would cross roads. That no longer happens with the Alameda Corridor. We need to complete that with the Alameda Corridor East, and we need the federal government to help us on this. The port supports innovative funding options such as TIFIA loans. We're looking at a $300 million TIFIA loan to complete the bridge. And also other sustainable revenue sources for funding the nation's infrastructure. We support a national freight policy that will provide a level playing field among all gateway regions. We're moving ahead on a number of fronts. And as you can see, we're making investments and exploring new technologies that are truly cutting edge. But we are nothing without our people. And the appointments we've made over the last 3 months are a clear sign that our bench is deep and we have a world-class talent to lead us forward. These diverse appointments include Rick Cameron and Heather Tomley, Suzanne Plegia, Sean Gamet, and others, and they're already making a difference in keeping the port competitive. We have a lot of work to do, many more technologies to explore, and opportunities to pursue. And I am truly excited about where we are going and how we are getting there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Dines. That was an excellent presentation. As you can see, great things are happening at the Port of Long Beach, and even greater things are in store. And boy, you know, the acronym ACE is turning out to be quite a popular acronym today. So far, our panelists have talked about activity at the port and on the water. Our next two panelists will talk about moving cargo by land out of the port. We start with rail. Our next speaker is John Kaiser with Union Pacific. John was named Vice President and General Manager Intermodal in 2003 and is responsible for the railroad's intermodal business unit and about $4 billion in annual revenue. An engineer at heart, he joined Union Pacific in 2002 as Vice President and General Manager of Automotive. A key part of the goods moving industry is the railroads. And who better to provide us with a peak season outlook than our next speaker? Please welcome John Kaiser.
Thank you, and I appreciate, I'd like to echo comments of the earlier speakers of having the opportunity to be here today, and again, really appreciate the hospitality of the Port of Long Beach and the Harbor Commissioners in allowing me to be here. I want to start just by giving you a quick overview of Union Pacific. As you can see, we are the largest railroad in North America. This gives you a little idea of where we serve. We serve all the states west of the Mississippi is a simple way to think of that. About 45,000 employees, and you know the intermodal business was one of 6 you see in the pie chart. We are the largest business by both revenue and volume at the railroad, and so what happens in the ports is very important to us. Now, when you think about our company, we are very proud of, again, the reputation we have in the marketplace. We certainly are pleased that Fortune has named us for the 4th consecutive year our most admired company in the transportation industry. We're very, very focused on hiring a diverse, strong workforce recognized by, again, many national organizations, as well as we're a top military, usually in the top 5 of hiring people coming back from the military into our workforce in the country, and are often recognized by both the government and veterans organizations for our support of those people who do so much to help protect us and make our country strong. And again, what we do is all about what we do for our customers, the shippers that use our railroad. And you can see that we have a lot of very demanding customers, just as everyone here does. And people, like the auto manufacturers, home product producers, et cetera. It's just a few we have listed here, and we are very focused on making sure that what we do meets their needs. And so that's really what my comments will be about today. The intermodal business, as I mentioned, about $4 billion in revenue last year. Our volume is basically 50-50. When we call an international move, is what is moving in a marine container. So when you see that international volume, about a little over 50%, 53% moves in a marine container on the railroad. Now there's a different service criteria for marine freight for us. It's shown in that international kind of gold bar. We tend to move that about 400 miles a day on a transit schedule. Think of that from like LA to Chicago in 5 days. A domestic container is really intended to be a 53-foot, like you see an 18-wheeler, as you call it, on the road. We move those that's equivalent in a container, and that is about a 600-mile-a-day transit, which is really competitive with over-the-road trucks, a big growth focus for us. So when you look at our business in the West, this is both our railroad as well as our main competitor in the West, all the volume that moves. The good news is that intermodal has been the fastest. It's now the largest and been the fastest growing commodity on rails since the turn of the decade, or so the turn of the century. You can see it's grown about 3.5% per year on average, that 3.6 in the lower right, but it's really changed in the last half a dozen years. In the first 6 years of the century, it was growing 7.5% with marine containers. That's now changed in the last 6 years or so, and it's growing more with domestic containers. And I think that's going to continue, and that's a part of what we're dealing with when we talk about the drive and what's happening with the ocean carriers, the infrastructure at the ports, and how we all have to collectively adapt to what's really the marketplace saying they prefer to move that freight in a certain way for economic purposes. And last year, the domestic movements were actually larger for the very first time ever in the rail industry from an intermodal perspective than the marine container movements. So why is that? Quite a few. You can look at this again online a little later. But one of the messages here is that this is driving our ocean carrier customers collectively to figure out how to deal with this changing environment. The bar chart that you see there in the upper left shows, you can see that blue stack bar says the number of vessels moving are about the same, about 5,000 worldwide globally in the global TEU fleet. But you can see that the line bar there is saying that the average size of those vessels has increased significantly over the last 4 or 5 years. And that's what this is all about. When you see the lower chart, that they're buying very, very large vessels. There aren't more, but they're are much larger. And so we have a lot of capacity driving the formation of those alliances that Chairman Cordero and others have mentioned earlier. And this is a big change that we see coming. And it has implications for what we want to do and what we need to do as a railroad and even as a port. Now, when you look at this just basically says, though, the customers, those shippers that are using, are still choosing the San Pedro ports. That's the blue bar at the top. Even though the volumes have been, as you saw, frankly, down a bit from where they were back in the peak, the percentage of freight coming in here is still roughly 56%. This is of all trans-Pacific imports. But what has happened is Canada has become very much somebody we have to watch and pay attention to with their competitiveness. They move just about just under 5% of all the freight now, and it was virtually none here back as long ago as 2006. And the East Coast ports, although we hear a lot about that investment in infrastructure, have not actually gained share against the West Coast ports. But it's something, again, to watch as we see these vessels change going forward. Now, why is that? When it gets down to what's required to move the freight, it's a lot about the infrastructure. And the good news is, as you've heard before, the West Coast ports, we already have that infrastructure needed. we are big ship ready, as you've heard the term. These are some indications of what it means to be big ship ready. Do you have greater than 50-foot channel depth? In the berths, you can see that the West Coast ports there, the upper ones, Long Beach, LA, Oakland, Seattle, Tacoma, that's the case. Panamax ready, greater than, certain size of vessel, which is called Panamax. In other words, it can fit through the Panama Canal, is larger than that. The big thing, of course, is you can see that you start to have issues when you go to the East Coast, and this is where a lot of that infrastructure spending is required. And these are very, very expensive. Often there are always hundreds of millions of dollars, if not in the billions of dollars, for every one of those X's is required in order to make the particular port's infrastructure ready to handle freight. Again, when that big vessel comes in and berths here at Long Beach or whatever, and you're awed by the size of a 13,000 MSC or other vessel, you can see the number of actual cranes available to work those vessels. LA, Long Beach, dramatically more infrastructure capability than the other ports around the country. As you can see, with 77 cranes, no other port infrastructure is usually within 15, 20% of that. And so even though, so to think of that freight going somewhere else, those other ports will need to have a lot of that infrastructure in place in order to handle it. And certainly that's something that we all collectively need to work together on to make sure the freight still comes to the West Coast. On-dock rail is critical. The Port of Long Beach has taken some very significant steps with the Middle Harbor project, as is the Port of Long Beach with what's going on at TRAPAC. Very important. There's no question that the best way to move all the freight is on-dock rail. It does require infrastructure and benefits, and we're very pleased that the port's working and supporting that, and we're very much supportive of moving as much as we can on dock. Matter of fact, that we move 64% of all the freight we move here by rail is moving from on dock off the ports, and we're focused. We want that number to be as high as possible, and those new projects will help us increase that number. But you can see some of the other ports in other parts of the country, that's not the case. Finally, once those big vessels come in, basically there's only so much freight that will be consumed in the local LA, Long Beach metro area. So if the vessel is, let's say, going from a 7,000 to a 13,000, most of that extra freight is what we call discretionary, meaning that it is not going to be consumed here and it needs to have a fluid, efficient way to move to another location, and rail is what that's about. We're very pleased that we offer significantly more opportunities to do that than our competitor here. As you can see out of the ports, the San Pedro ports, we serve 18 different metros out of this location, just in our served territory, and many more once you add the East Coast. And same thing out of the Northern California or PNW markets. We're very focused on providing those more options, which means that those vessel operators will have more options to use us with those large vessels when they come in. And it's all about service in this case to make sure we do get the freight versus the East Coast, and that's obviously the rail side, but working at the ports, getting it off the vessels, onto the trains, and moving out of the area. And again, that's what we all should be focused on, making sure that's seamless and effective in serving the inland infrastructure. The other part of this is that's going inland. It's about getting it back. And frequently, the containers are coming, and the exports that we talk about and want to focus on are often not necessarily coming from where those containers went inland. So we have to find a way to get those containers that are empty and available from those, if you will, supply points or surplus points, which are on the blue dots, to the demand points, which are the triangles. And so in the last 18 months to 2 years, we have put in a number of dedicated by-schedule services, moving those empty containers to those demand points from the surplus points, which again allows our collective customers and the ocean carriers to benefit in moving that freight in and out of the country. And then finally, I want to talk just a minute about what makes all that happen is a lot of investment in infrastructure. I mean, as a railroad, we are 100% private company, privately funded, and all of the investment we put in is coming from our own private funds. You can see we lead the industry in investment over the last 10 years, about $36 billion US we've spent since 2003. Should have a record spend of just under $4 billion in 2014. A couple of things that really do influence what happens here in the ports that we'd like to comment on. And again, I know Fran Inman was introduced earlier, but she's very influential in helping us get this West Colton flyover project. This was a public-private partnership of about $100 million. Public and private funding here. that you can see we had an at-grade crossing, literally one of the busiest in the country, where both our trains and the BNSF's, one of us would have to be stopped at all times in order for the trains to go through. You can see it now. It just opened up last fall, and we can operate our trains simultaneously, which reduces congestion and improves the whole infrastructure capabilities of the basin and the experience for the motorists and the citizens here. So very good project, and thank you for the support on that, Ms. Inman. So 2 other things I want to mention. You have to be able to get it out. Once you get it out of LA Long Beach, you got to get it efficiently to the rest of the country. We do that over what we call our Sunset Route, goes from Los Angeles to the west part of Texas. We've added double track and signaling, investing over $1 billion here in the last half a dozen years. This has now increased our capacity. We can move about 90 trains a day on that line today. We're only moving about 65, so we have a lot of capacity here and are very much able to move whatever comes our way right now through the port, whether it be intermodal, bulk, or whatever other commodity, as we continue to invest ahead to support our network. Another major project here, which kind of builds on some of the comments made earlier, is at the eastern point of that. It's right at El Paso. We've just opened a $400 million major project. This serves both Mexico, U.S., that nearshoring, as well as offshoring capabilities that some of the speakers mentioned earlier. We literally ran our very first train out of there this week. Major project, we're very excited. And this an example of why you say, well, does that matter here? It does. We bring a lot of freight, electronics from Taiwan, for example, Japan, et cetera, that move into this location, cross the border into the maquiladoras in Mexico by truck, where they're made into final assembly for electronics, Apple products that we all buy and go and sell, TVs, appliances, and they come back across the border, and then we distribute those in domestic 53-foot equipment throughout the United States, where it's consumed by the rest of our fellow citizens in the country. Truly a global supply chain, and it's about making sure we're fluid and effective through the ports of LA Long Beach in and out of that marketplace. So again, all part of things we're putting together to facilitate the flow and movement of freight through this area. So in kind of conclusion, I can see I'm over my 10 minutes, so I'm going to wrap this up. But our goal here at UP is to say, again, we're well positioned to support growth, however it may come at the ports, intermodally, bulk, or otherwise. We're continuing to see a lot of promise in the intermodal business itself. And we do truly believe that the West Coast ports are going to remain the preferred choice for Asian freight. They're big ship ready now, and I think we have opportunities to be more efficient and effective, but we're all working together to make that happen, and it's important we continue that process. And we're very focused, again, on providing that broadest market coverage, as well as the fastest, most reliable and consistent service in order to make sure our customers keep choosing these locations. Okay, so with that, I'll close, and thank you very much for your attention.
Well done, John, and thanks again for all that wonderful insight in so little time. Now we're going to talk trucks with Alex Charon. Here's another familiar face. An attorney, born and raised in Long Beach, Alex has served as Managing Director of Trade Relations and Port Operations for the Port of Long Beach. For the last several years, he has worked at the Government Affairs and Public Relations firm Englander, Canabi & Allen as Senior Vice President responsible for the firm's transportation and clean technologies practices. Through the firm, Alex serves as Executive Director of the Harbor Trucking Association, a coalition of Los Angeles and Long Beach intermodal carriers. He's here today representing the trucking industry, and we'll discuss the trucker's perspective. So please welcome Alex Charon.
Well, thank you very much, Noel. I appreciate it. And on behalf of the Harbor Trucking Association and our over 100 members who collectively represent 60% of the entire drayage fleet in Southern California, I want to express my sincere appreciation and thanks to the Port of Long Beach Harbor Commissioners and staff for this opportunity to speak with you today about trucking issues and truck mobility. There are 3 specific points that I want to share with you this morning, and if you don't listen to anything else I say in this presentation, please listen to these 3 things. Number 1, turn times at our terminal gates are the single biggest competitive issue we are facing today, not just to the trucking community, but to every segment of the supply chain. Number 2, if we do not do something concrete about fixing or minimizing visit times at these gates, and we do it now, we will lose cargo to other ports. And 3, we need to find a metric, once and for all, that all stakeholders can agree on as to what is an acceptable turn time. Otherwise, we will continue to focus on the problem without any specific guidance or sense of direction. Before I get into more detail on those 3 topics, I want to share with you a personal story. A year ago, in January of 2013, just before the Harbor Trucking Association decided to launch its truck mobility data study, which I'll talk about in a minute, I had the opportunity to be on single dad duty for an entire week while my wife was out of town. And as any self-respecting single dad for the week would do, I let my 2 kids order pizza almost every night for dinner. What was amazing to me about that process was the consistency and the predictability with which that pizza was delivered. We all know the mantra, 30 minutes or less, and it held true. And as that week went on, and I noticed the lessons to be learned in logistics generally and for truck turn times specifically from those pizza deliveries, I guarantee you that if I were to assemble the top 100 decision makers in the field of port logistics today and ask them, how long does it take Domino's to deliver pizza? They would all know the answer with certainty. Yet if I were to ask those same 100 decision makers in the field of logistics, how long does it take drayage trucks to pick up your cargo from these terminal gates, they wouldn't have an idea, other than to know that it simply takes too long. And therein lies the problem. What is an acceptable turn time for BCOs? What is an acceptable turn time for MTOs, ports, and truckers that we can all live with? The answer to this question is precisely why the HTA chose to undergo its TMD study, or Truck Mobility Data Study. The study started in 2013 and has been collecting GPS data from over 1,600 trucks for the last several months with the express purpose of tracking both queue time and in-terminal time for truck visits in order to come up with monthly averages segregated by terminal and time of day. And I want to thank E2 ManageTech, our vendor, for helping us with that project. Simple, right? But what do we do with that data? That type of data collection had simply not existed prior to this study. What the HTA found to be useful was to publish the data for our subscribers in order to track which terminals were processing trucks in and out of their respective facilities faster than others. Simple as that. Why is this metric important for us in the trucking industry? Well, just as the MTO measures productivity by moves against a vessel, and just as the ports measure productivity by cargo throughput, truckers and their BCO customers measure productivity by turns in a shift. The more turns, the more efficient a trucking company is at servicing its BCO customer, and the more money the driver makes. Why is this last component, driver pay, so important? It's something I think that has been lost in recent discussions, quite frankly, about turn times, but something that will be absolutely critical in the year going forward. Because the simple truth is this: the more turns a driver makes in a shift, the less time he spends waiting in line, the more money he or she makes as a result. And the more that happens, the less likely the influence that outside groups, including the Teamsters, have in claiming that drivers need to be organized. It's simply that simple. Forget about your position on labor unions, forget about your position on the Teamsters. This has to do with driver productivity. What has been lost in recent months is that this issue and this issue go hand in hand. In fact, I suggest to you that they are the exact same issue. When you read a headline in the JOC about the Teamsters picketing a trucking company here in Southern California, I suggest to you that it has everything to do with turn times. When you read a headline about Port Metro Vancouver and truckers striking there for 2 weeks straight, I suggest to you that it has everything to do with turn times. And yes, when you read about the State of California Department of Labor investigating misclassification of truck drivers, I suggest to you that it has everything to do with turn times. The bottom line is this: when nearly 20% of the truck visits are taking over 2 hours at these terminal gates, as our data shows, we have a competitive issue, not only with our common customer, but with other stakeholders. The data is now available on a monthly basis at the HTA website. Let's use it as a tool. I think it is worth noting here that of our first subscribers, over half were BCOs. So what is the solution? We all know about dynamic appointment systems and appreciate the efforts of the Port of Long Beach in moving that issue along. We all know about the Freightus project, and we certainly support that program. These endeavors are certainly part of the solution, and the ports have done a great job of embracing them, and we applaud them for that. But we still have not addressed the core question. The same question I asked you at the beginning of this presentation: what is an acceptable turn time? We need to arrive at that metric before we can implement the dynamic appointment system, and we need to arrive at that metric before we fully implement the Freightus project. We need a goal to work towards, a concrete number. Port Metro Vancouver has a provision in its tariff that states unequivocally that 1 hour is an acceptable turn time. Jim Newsom, president of the South Carolina Ports Authority, told an audience at the JOC conference in New Jersey at the end of last year that 1 hour is an acceptable turn time in his ports as well. Well, on behalf of the Harbor Trucking Association and our members, I tell you that 1 hour should be the agreed upon metric at these two ports as well. We should use the data that we have been gathering and convene the stakeholder group that Commissioner Dines talked about in February at the Board of Harbor Commissioners meeting, and look at ways to incentivize, both financially and operationally, the terminals and the truckers for meeting this 1 hour turn time goal. If you have not seen Commissioner Dines' comments at the board meeting in February when we presented our rollout of the TMD, I would strongly urge you to do so. If we do this, if we all agree upon this 1 hour metric and look at ways to successfully implement it, either through the tariff or other mechanisms, we will realize greater efficiencies at the gates, drivers will get more turns in a shift, and the peripheral issues of driver unrest will be mitigated. Our hope is that a year from now, if I'm invited back, when we stand here at this event and ask the question, how long does it take a truck to get in and out of a terminal at LA Long Beach, we will know the answer definitively. Our industry deserves that 1 hour metric. 6 years ago, you asked our industry to spend $1 billion on new trucks, and we did. And now we're asking our partners, in turn, to help us define and enforce an acceptable turn time. After all, if it is good enough for Vancouver, if it's good enough for South Carolina, and if it's good enough for Domino's Pizza, it is certainly good enough for the terminals at the ports of LA and Long Beach. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alex. Much appreciated. And thanks again to all of our panelists who are here today. Let's give them all a round of applause. You've heard from the experts, and now it's time for your questions. As the panelists make their way to the platform, members of the audience who would like to ask a question are invited to go to one of our microphones located on the aisles. When you arrive at the mic, please let us know if yours is a general question or if you would like to direct your question to a particular speaker or a group of particular speakers. We'll also be asking questions received online. We are very pleased to have Bill Mangaluza as our moderator for this part of the program, and I would expect that he will also have some questions of his own for the panel. A respected journalist and a familiar face to most of you, Bill is a senior editor with the Journal of Commerce, based here in Long Beach. Bill joined the Journal of Commerce in 1980. So I don't know of anyone else who has a better perspective on this industry. So please welcome Bill Mangaluza.
You did need 10 minutes, Mark.
Thank you very much, Noel, and thank you for the Port of Long Beach for inviting me to be moderator for the Pulse of the Ports. This is the 10th Pulse of the Ports meeting, and I've been here to every one, and I keep coming back because there's so much content, and in the news business, that's what it's all about, is content. So let's get started with the questions. I have a few to get the ball rolling. I have a couple that came up from the audience, and I anticipate that we will have more. The lights here make it difficult to see who's at the microphone, but jump up and down in order to catch my attention if you have to. Let's start with Walter. Walter, China. China, a couple years ago, and you were indicating, was trying to shift from an export-driven to a domestic-driven economy. This has certainly affected the trans-Pacific trade, and their growth the last couple years has not been their normal double-digit. What do you see happening in China this year and next? Are they going to resume their role as one of the engines of international trade?
It's a difficult transition time for China. And when you look at the economic data for China, investment spending, which is in most countries about 15 to 25% of their GDP, had reached about 50%. And that's why the GDP growth number for China was so high. We were looking at 8 to 12% about 10 years ago. But when you strip that out and you looked at consumer spending, that was a much lower number, growing at about 3 to 5% a year. And as China steps back from building more ports and railways and factories and focuses more on its domestic economy, that investment contribution to GDP will decline, and China's long-term sustainable GDP growth rate will drop to about 3 to maybe 6% during some of the good years. And this has a lot of analysts nervous. However, we point out that even the Chinese government has said that the GDP figures are more of a guide than an actual measure. And what we really track are things like trade flows at the volume level, not at the dollar level. We track electricity consumption. And the picture that is painting of China is that it's an economy trying to avoid going into a recession. Right now, we're seeing the government stepping back a little bit and trying to ease conditions for the exporters and trying to let some of the infrastructure spending pick back up again. I think that there is plenty of degrees of freedom for China to stabilize things and move forward. But I think the days of looking for very high growth rates out of China, they're clearly behind us. The government's very committed to developing its economy into a strong consumption engine as Europe, Japan, and the United States are.
Thank you, Walter. Bruce, we've heard the number of shipping lines in the global trade arena are under pressure. There could be consolidation. We're seeing first through the alliances, but the financials for a number of the container lines have not been good in recent years. They've lost money 4 out of the last 5 years. Are the BCOs concerned that maybe in the next 4 or 5 years, the couple of dozen of large container lines could shrink to a handful, maybe 10, 12, and if that in fact is the scenario, what does this mean for BCOs in terms of service, in terms of rates?
That's a very good question. Thank you, Bill. At the margin out there on the edge, yeah, there is a concern. I think that BCOs, no matter the size of the company, they will each tell you that they must have a vibrant, dynamic, and financially successful ocean shipping industry, domestic rail industry, domestic trucking industry. I mean, they can't get product to or from their place of business without them. I think that they realistically see all of those elements as part of their business relationship day to day. And so they look at the changes that are going on in those industries, and in ocean shipping in particular. The one thing that you do not hear from BCOs is anybody complaining about rates. They've never had it so good. Every time there's a GRI announced on Monday, by Tuesday afternoon, it's melted away. For the BCO in the short term, sure, that's, life is good. But smart folks know that there's a long-term implication from that. It's not sustainable. The losses are not sustainable. There has to be a turnaround. Now, will consolidation come? I don't know. A private comment, I think that the owners of a lot of the international shipping lines are very proud men, and they do not want to give up the family jewel, the crown that makes them a ship owner and a big player in the global market. But the economics may force some consolidation, and what the BCOs want more than anything else is competition. They compete in their own local markets. They compete for their share of whatever it is they're doing. They want the lines to be good, solid, honest competitors and negotiate on the basis of rates. Lastly, they expect rates will go up. I mean, they cannot stay in the basement and the sub-basement that they've been in for several years now. Rates will go up, and there will be no surprise there.
Thank you, Bruce. Antoine, the trade agreements that the United States is looking at now, the two big ones, the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the U.S.-European Partnership, a lot of what might come out of those, I think, depends on a fast-track approval process in the United States that seems to be under pressure right now in Congress. As an insider there in Washington, how do you assess what's going to happen with fast track?
Well, thank you for styling me an insider. I appreciate that. Both the transatlantic and the Trans-Pacific partnerships, I think, are huge and hold a lot of promise for everyone sitting in this room here today, and certainly all of our stakeholders and various constituencies throughout the country as well. I think that, for a number of reasons, not the least of which was, I think, I'll just be frank and say, not a lot of activity on Capitol Hill today has allowed these agreements to languish. I know that we in the administration, all of our private and public sector partners are pushing hard, trying to educate all of our various external stakeholders, elected officials, and the like about the importance of these agreements, and in particular, the importance of the president getting trade promotion authority so that, in effect, he can and our U.S. trade representative can negotiate in good faith with the dozens of partners that are impacted by both of these agreements. I know that one of the things we're trying to do, and I think that this venue here this morning allows us an opportunity to do, is talk to our communities about the importance of trade, particularly as it relates to U.S. economic growth and job growth. Indeed, what all of these other free trade partners know about international trade is that it increases the number of jobs and increases the number of high-paying and good jobs. And what I can tell you, and I'll close on this point, is that whether or not the U.S. participates in these agreements or looks to proliferate the number of free trade agreements that we're a part of is less of a consequence than the fact of the matter that all the other countries in the world are doing this. So I think it's important for us to understand that and to not sit on the sideline with respect to both our engagements across both oceans.
Thank you, Antoine. Mario, the ocean carriers in the alliances here in Southern California, for example, call at different ports. So you may have one alliance with some of its members calling in Long Beach, other members call in Los Angeles. Now, when the FMC gave approval for the P3 formation, you put a stipulation in there about negotiating with terminals, with ports for calling rights at their facilities. Can you explain the significance of that and how it personally could affect Long Beach and Los Angeles?
Well, number one, is this on? As my comments indicated, in terms of the vessel calls at different ports, there will be some winners, and there will be some losers. I think that with regard to the West Coast, I think that question is substantially mitigated because obviously of the deep water port. With regard to the negotiations with individual terminal operators, clearly part of what the FMC looks to, and if one looks into the what's been put out by P3 themselves, this network center based out of London, that's supposed to insulate basically a group kind of discussion with regard to the selection of individual terminal operators. So basically, the point being is, I think that the status quo of carriers negotiating with individual terminal operators is going to continue. Again, part of these alliance agreements in terms of vessel sharing does not include the fact that in the case of the P3, that all three carriers will come together and, have an inner discussion in terms of selecting a particular terminal operator, and or port for that matter, so to speak. So I think one of the things that the FMC, and last I'll say, that is going to be very seriously approaching here in terms of the monitoring and reporting process in the coming year is to make sure that what's been represented, in fact, stays true. And you will hear from the FMC if, in fact, some of the answers that were given to some of these key questions start changing. Because then, of course, when we look at 6G and the statute that I referenced, that's very apropos to looking to some of these questions about anti-competitive behavior.
Thank you, Mario. Rich, one of the contributors to gate congestion is the chassis issue, chassis shortages, chassis dislocations, et cetera. And I think we heard from Alex that he wants a solution to the gate problems right now. So this stakeholder group that is looking into the chassis, you said they're finishing up their report and they'll be coming out with an answer, at least suggestions. How soon after this report is released do you see action actually being taken in the harbor on the chassis issue?
Well, thank you, Bill. I think we're going to have to see what the actual recommendations are. The ports are working more as facilitators for the discussion. I think the group will work immediately. This is something that needs to be addressed right away. When we look at the challenges we face with chassis, and I think that we're actually at a point where it's getting a little worse before it's getting better. You've had the carriers exit chassis ownership, and you probably have 70% of the 100,000 dray chassis in the complex controlled by two leasing companies, DCLI, and which is Direct Chassis Link, that was actually created by Maersk, and FlexiVan. And I think the leasing companies have been very proactive in watching the ports move with this stakeholder group, and in their belief, perhaps they've seen that if they don't do something quickly, we were. So I think we've pushed them in a direction, but now that nobody understands who owns the chassis, I think we're at a time of crisis. So we really need to bring everyone together immediately to focus on this. And I agree with Alex very much. I think 1 hour is a good time for a turn time. But I think the port authorities of LA and Long Beach are going to have to look very closely on what powers we have and how we want to use them. I'm open to looking at the tariff, but I certainly don't want to hurt our tenants in any way. Our marine terminal operators should be given the opportunity to make a good profit. We don't want to penalize them. But I think we can all work together on this. It's very important when we look at how our terminal operators are making money. They're making money on the vessel and they're making money on the rail. But they don't make money in yard delivery of truckers. And this has been a challenge that we've seen for many years. And this is perhaps a reason why we don't see the right amount or the correct amount of labor being used to service the truckers. Would you like to order too many people or not enough? So I think you tend to err on the side of caution if it's costing your business a lot of money. Again, getting back to, and when you look at what we can do with on-dock rail, that efficiency of on-dock rail is going to help improve turn times. It'll relieve congestion in the yard. It'll relieve congestion at the gate. But these are some of the things we have to work together with the stakeholders. And instead of breaking out the big stick of the tariff, I'd like to have everyone try and work towards a solution that satisfies everyone.
Thanks, Rich. John, I think the holy grail for the shipping lines and therefore by extension the railroads for discretionary cargo is in the center of the country, or maybe getting around the Ohio, Detroit, all the way down to Atlanta area, where technically you could serve as a shipping line, you could serve that market through either Atlantic or Pacific coasts. Now, with the rapid growth of the Suez services, they're all water services to the East Coast, big ships, 9,000 TEU ships being used. What are your people looking for as far as any possible loss of discretionary cargo to that interior area where a shipment that maybe used to go through the West Coast might be able to go on a big ship to the East Coast through the Suez route? Do you see some loss of cargo share for West Coast ports?
Yes, thanks, Bill. Well, it's nominal from here. We do believe that a lot of the freight that's likely to shift has already shifted. We've looked at this quite a while for over many years, and we believe about a third of all the freight coming from Asia is naturally probably going to migrate and move over an East Coast port. Last year, that was at about 31%. So our thinking is that we're 1 or 2 points away from that. And actually, you might even recall, I didn't show this chart today, but it's actually been very steady as far as what is going to the East Coast ports over the last 2 or 3 years. And that's already with the Suez Canal allowing, you have the 13, 14, even 18,000 T vessels going through that. So our belief is there's some amount of freight that will go. We think it's nominal. However, it's very, very important that some of the issues that the panel has talked about, from the fluidity and handling efficiency and cost effectiveness through the ports on the West Coast, that we are competitive in both cost and time to do that. And so the things we're talking about are the right things, and we just have to continue to really push on that, because I think all of us have our interest aligned that that's how we want the freight to move.
Thanks, John. Alex, back on the congestion issue at the terminals, the strike that you discussed in Vancouver has been brought to a conclusion. It was a really nasty affair up there. The 14-point action plan that the government there in Canada and the port agreed to with the trucking community calls for penalties on the marine terminals, tiered penalties for gate delays. Now, it starts at 90 minutes, a $50 fee, and then it goes up in increments of $25 for each half-hour delay. Do you think a program like that, one, is feasible for Southern California, and two, how does one implement that when you don't have a government involved dictating it?
Well, I do think that it's feasible, but I agree with Commissioner Dines. I don't think we're there yet, and I don't think we need to avail ourselves of the tariff as Vancouver did at this point. I think the recent trend in discussions about big complex issues like the chassis issue and turn times has been very fruitful, and I think the ports have done a wonderful job in facilitating those discussions. They've assured that the right stakeholders are in the meetings. They've assured that there's action items. Brett Mascaro's done a wonderful job on the Port of Long Beach side, kind of being the roll-up-your-sleeves guy on the ground, doing that, and I see that trend continuing. So I think the next step is to fully implement this stakeholder group that Commissioner Dines talked about a month or so ago, and get the right people in the room and see what can happen. I can tell you anecdotally that since we've published our turn time report, the HTA has met individually with a number of terminals to see if there are one-off solutions that we can work with them on a short-term basis that are unique to those terminal facilities, and those have worked well. And I think if you expand that to the larger MTO community, I'm optimistic about what can be achieved. But again, going back to sort of the theme of the presentation, everybody has to come up and agree to what a turn time is. If you were to ask Bruce Wargo today And I respect Bruce for this response. If you were to ask Bruce what a turn time is, he's going to give you the in-terminal turn time. If you're going to ask a trucking company, Brian Griley sitting out here, what's an acceptable turn time, he'll tell you it's something different. It's the in-terminal time and the amount of time that his driver has to wait in line. So until we can agree on what a turn time is and what's acceptable to all the stakeholders, I think that's the first hurdle. But I'm optimistic that once we clear that, and again, we're going to push for an hour. I think we've looked at enough of the data. We've seen enough activity through the months that I think an hour is acceptable. It's not great, but I think it's acceptable. Then we can come up with solutions on how to implement. There are great programs already out there. Freightus and the dynamic appointment system were two that we referenced. So to answer your question, I think it is feasible to do a tariff-like item, but I don't think we're there yet.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Do we have a question out here? Okay, we don't. So I do have two questions from the audience, so I will get into those, but please join in. Actually, this is kind of following up both Rich and Alex on the same theme we've been talking about. You know, basically, to boil down this question, there's been a lot of talk, but not a lot of action on addressing the gate issue. Some of the suggestions include rescheduling longshoremen's breaks, restructuring Pier Pass, a port-wide appointment system, et cetera. Rich, you know some of those issues firsthand. What possible solutions do you see out there to the turn time issue?
I think the most important thing we need to do is we need to open up the discussion and start talking about real solutions. For about 2 years now, I've been talking about this crazy idea that we actually have our ports open 24 hours a day. You can go to the grocery store, and at 2 o'clock in the morning, you can buy some aspirin or whatever you need. And all you do is you get the person that's stocking the shelves, and they come and they check you out. It takes 2 minutes. So why can't we have the absolutely best port complex in North America be open 24 hours a day? You have a labor contract that allows you to be open 24 hours a day. But you have 8-hour shifts, and so we'll have the terminal open from 8 o'clock in the morning until 3 o'clock in the morning. So you run 2 longshore labor shifts. But truckers work 10 hours, and they can work an hour of break, so they can work 11 hours. So if I'm a trucker and I can be driving in my truck 11 hours, and you have 17 hours of service, I'm going to pick and choose when I'm going to come. I'm not going to show up at 8 o'clock in the morning. I'm going to show up at 11 o'clock in the morning, and I'm going to finish at midnight or something along that line. So we do not operate our terminals efficiently when delivering to drivers. I think we also need to look at a real-time appointment system. And half our cargo coming in our ports are with the large beneficial cargo owners, your Targets, your Walmarts, your Home Depots. The small mom and pops can't take cargo at 2:30 in the morning. But some of the big guys can. And I think it's going to take a lot of cooperation from the beneficial cargo owner community, and it's going to take a real-time appointment system that's going to have an umbrella software that's going to allow our 13 marine terminals in both ports to protect their proprietary information on how they operate their terminals, but allow truckers to know, you're scheduled to be here in 15 minutes, be here in 15 minutes. This will allow the marine terminal operators to actually decide how much labor demand they're going to have. And that's the efficiency we need to find. Nobody wants people sitting around for 3 hours waiting for a truck to come in, but nobody wants a trucker to come in and wait 3 hours because no one's there to service them. So I think we need to come up with a bunch of really good ideas, and we're already doing a really good job at bringing the right stakeholders to the table. And the railroads are there, the beneficial cargoes are there, the marine terminal operators, labor's there, the trucking companies are there. And we need to blend all of these great ideas into coming towards one solution that actually becomes more of a living document, something we can constantly change. And I don't think we're going to get it right the first time, but I think we need to move in the right direction. And I think this is how we get to a 1-hour turn time.
Okay, then real quickly, Rich, I don't want to bore our audience with you being the only one speaking. No, you're doing a great job. So, but the issue of breaks, longshore breaks, and you can look at this from both the employer's perspective and the longshoreman's perspective. When a terminal stops its activity for whatever reason, an hour lunch break, et cetera, getting cranked up again, this could turn into an hour and a half of downtime. The terminals will say, well, we have two options to address that problem. We can stagger our lunch breaks, so give you 50% gate productivity spread out over 2 hours, or we can do what we're doing now is, shut down for an hour and then give you 100% productivity for the remainder of the time. Is it that stark? Is there a way to keep the gates open continuously without the terminal operator incurring a huge expense for extra labor?
Well, we only have to go back to 2007 because we used to do that. It is once the Great Recession hit that some people in the industry decided they weren't trying to make money, they were trying to save money. And when you're trying to save money, you're cutting costs. When you're trying to make money, you're putting in an investment. And in 2006, let's go back to 2004. We couldn't move cargo through our port. We were open 8 hours during the day, and we had more cargo inside the terminal than we could get out. So we created Pier Pass, which was actually a great idea. We'd go to night gates. Unfortunately, it's become into something I don't think it was originally planned to be. So you can absolutely start early. You can work through your lunch. Even if you man the gates at 50% during the lunch hour, you're not stopping the operation. You're correct, Bill. I mean, if you shut down for an hour lunch, you're going to lose another half an hour starting back up again. And that really is having an impact on turn times. Because when we look at the turn time studies and we look at where the peaks are on where the truckers are waiting the longest, it's outside the gate waiting for the second shift to start and the queue. And I agree with Alex. A trucker will show up at 3:30 in the afternoon trying to avoid Pier Pass. And he gets let in at 6 o'clock to save $100 for the cargo owner. But he has to wait in line for 2.5 hours. Operate 24/7. Man the gates in the yard 50%. You flex your lunches. You can bring in people early. You can bring in people late. We can make this work. And again, it's really about finding the efficiency of hiring the right amount of labor to the demand that's needed by the trucks coming in the terminal.
Okay, thanks, Rich. That was a very good explanation. Now, here's a question from a veteran of our industry, and he's talking about the new reality where the number of ships coming into the port is actually being reduced as container counts increase because fewer ships, but much larger ships. Now, his point is that this is having residual impact on the many service companies that are in the harbor area, the tugs, the pilots, the marine exchange, et cetera. Now, his question, which I don't know if anybody can answer, is what is being done to attract more ships in addition to increasing container counts? Walter, maybe just, and Bruce, looking at what's the new reality of fewer ships, but bigger ships bringing in more cargo. Is that pretty much what we have to look forward to, not only at major seaports like LA Long Beach, but at the second-tier ports too, that we're just going to see fewer ships calling? That's the new reality?
I think you should expect something of that nature simply because there are scale economies. The larger the ship, the larger the scale economies. And to some extent, this does affect the rates that you would expect ocean carriers to charge going forward. If you have scale economies and increases in productivity, then the ability to make a profit on a lower rate is improved. And considering that we only have so many gateways into the country, you can't keep losing a lot of time with smaller ships coming into the berths and leaving and using up a lot of time unproductively. It is the inevitable conclusion that as time goes by, it is fewer but much larger ships. It doesn't mean that berth occupancy is going to be that much less. It's still going to be there. It takes so much time to get these containers off the ships. But it does make sense to try to save as much time, unproductive time as possible, And I can't see how you would do that without going to larger ships, or for that matter, larger trains and larger trucks. Across the board, the supersizing of the industry, as you once put it, is basically inevitable.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Yes, we have a question.
Hi, I'd like to thank everyone for coming today. It's very interesting, but I was sent here for one reason, and that was to get some feedback on the upcoming contract negotiations and if our Plan B should be put into place for that. Thank you.
Why did I expect a question like that? And I'm going to answer it, to answer your question. Although Rich Dines is, in fact, a longshoreman, at this moment in time sitting here, he's representing the Port of Long Beach. And in all honesty, the ILWU and the PMA, what happens in the family stays in the family. I mean, that's the unwritten code there. So we really can't expect Rich or any of the other panelists to comment on this. So, but I cover it, you know, I speak with Jim McKenna all the time. I ask questions of the ILWU headquarters in San Francisco all the time. I usually don't get many answers, but I'll give you my take on what's going to happen, so I hope that doesn't disappoint you. The ILWU just completed its caucus a couple weeks ago in San Francisco. They have a list of demands which will be presented to the PMA when negotiations begin in about mid-May. We'll soon find out what those demands are. And listening to Jim McKenna, the head of the PMA, and talking to other industry executives who are on the board, here's the scenario they see developing. The negotiations will move very quickly. I know it was mentioned earlier, why not start the negotiations now? And therefore, when the July 1st deadline comes up, you know, we will have been into this for some time. Jim McKenna has said publicly they tried that once. It didn't work. You know, they started in March, and they accomplished nothing until May or June. So they're going back to their traditional negotiating posture, which is to start in mid-May and then meet every day nonstop until they get a contract. Now, the best minds in the industry are saying come July 1st, there will be no contract agreement. What they could do is extend the no strike clause from the existing contract. But in reality, what will probably happen is that week of July 1st to 6th or 7th, a lot of longshoremen like to take off for, you know, the holiday. July 4th is a paid holiday. July 5th is a paid holiday. It's Bloody Thursday celebration. Longshoremen like to make money. You know, why go on strike and not be paid for July 4th and July 5th when you weren't scheduled to work anyway? So in the real world, we will probably see very, you know, tense, contentious negotiations right through the July 4th week. Then, you know, there may be some work slowdowns. There have been every other contract negotiation I can remember, so I don't see why this should be any different. You know, there'll be beating of the chest, and, you know, this is our last, best, and final offer. And I do not anticipate, and from what I'm hearing from the industry, nobody anticipates an employer lockout, such as in 2002, or any kind of strike. And then probably by about mid-July, we will have a contract. That's the scenario. The major issues, in all honesty, of automation and of mechanization have been addressed in the 2002 and 2008 contracts. Those were huge. And the ILWU gave a lot in order to allow employers to really, employers can automate a facility any way they choose to, and the ILWU cannot stop it. So that is written in those two contracts. So those issues were addressed in the previous contracts. The issues in 2014 are really kind of boring to us, and they're not the high, you know, intensity types of issues that should precipitate any kind of work stoppage. They're basically jurisdictional issues, which I know are causing a lot of havoc up and down the coast. But it's the ILWU versus other waterfront unions competing for the same jobs, some of which are being created due to automation and information technology. In all honesty, the PMA has no control over some of that work. It's, you know, the companies that are bringing this work in are not PMA members, so they can give the ILWU anything they ask for, but they have nothing to give. You know, so those are the types of issues that the longshoremen are concerned about. They're concerned about the Affordable Health Care Act and the Cadillac tax on their health care plans. According to the PMA, that will cost the industry about $150 million a year. The ILWU is a no give back bargainer. They don't want to pay that tax. The employers say they can't afford it. Their medical costs are already extremely high. The ILWU, each member pays $0 for premiums and $1 copay for their medical prescriptions. Probably somewhere in there, they have a few bucks that they could kick in to, you know, for the Affordable Care Act Cadillac tax without, you know, sending them into bankruptcy. But that will be a big issue. In all honesty, it could make this a 3-year contract because it doesn't really kick in nationally until 2016. So those are the issues out there. You know, we have imperfect information right now, but that's my best guess as to what's going to happen. Oh, got more questions. Good. Okay. Are there regulations in place to reduce emissions on incoming vessels via upgrading chassis? Are there regulations in place to reduce emissions on incoming trucks and vehicles? Okay. Rich, yeah, why don't you take this?
Thank you, Bill. Actually, what the Ports of LA and Long Beach did was we were very proactive. In July 1, 2014, all the trucks coming into the ports in California were required to be the clean diesel trucks. And we've seen the challenges that Oakland still faces where our licensed motor carriers, the several hundred trucking companies that come into LA and Long Beach, they did this very proactively. As Alex mentioned, they spent nearly $1 billion in buying new clean diesel trucks that had to have a 2007 or newer engine. Now, to put that into perspective, that engine from 2007 is about 95% cleaner than an engine 20 years older than that. And this is why we've seen a reduction of 81% of diesel particulate matter in our ports. You can just remember those of us that were here 20 years ago, you couldn't see San Pedro from Long Beach. But I work in the port. I mean, we've had some beautiful days lately. The sky is clear. You don't see any pollution. You know, and the trucks run a lot better than they used to. It's made a dramatic impact. So we've addressed that. I think we have to look into the future and say, will we get to a Clean Trucks 2.0 program where we're moving towards alternative technologies, looking at alternative fuels, improving engine technologies for cleaner burns, and then looking at hybrid technologies like the Port of Long Beach has invested in hydrogen fuel cells, and Port of LA is constantly pursuing electric trucks. So we're continuing to raise the bar, even though we've met the California standards today.
Okay, thanks, Rich. We have time for one more question, I have been informed. Okay, well, then I'll ask it. John, you showed on your chart there the impact of the Canadian ports. You know, they are having an impact on West Coast market share up and down the coast. Seattle-Tacoma was down last year about 2%. LA Long Beach was up about the same amount, so maybe we could see some market share shifting down here. But I think Seattle-Tacoma did take a big hit from the Canadian ports, both Prince Rupert and in Vancouver. What do you see going forward there? Do you see the Canadian ports continuing to chip away at the U.S. West Coast ports, or is it more like the situation you described with the all-water services, that pretty much what has happened is what we are going to see in the future? How do you assess Canada?
You know, that's a great question, and you know, like, I think there is a little bit of the jury out on that. My personal opinion is that we probably have more to worry about in the U.S. West Coast ports with Canada becoming more aggressive than we do the East Coast. Not everybody may share that thoughts, but there's no question that Canada has a very proactive program working with even their local, regional, and national governments to promote, just as we're saying export from U.S., they're promoting both imports and exports for that marketplace. And the U.S. being such a large, attractive market right on their border, they see this as a very attractive opportunity. And they clearly are investing in infrastructure. They're working on doing things to help move the freight through those markets. I think Vancouver's actually interesting enough, I think more of a concern maybe than Rupert. That's not necessarily the conventional wisdom, but Rupert is pretty much reached its a functional capacity right now. There was a lot of public money put in the last expansion there. It's not clear that there will be public money at this point, so it makes private investment, which would be quite expensive for the next phase of expansion. And I don't know that, given the current global economics and the carriers, et cetera, who's going to step forward for that right now. Whereas in Vancouver, there have been some major investments made, particularly on the Roberts Bank capability. There's a strong effort going on with some rail infrastructure being built out to the Roberts Bank infrastructure that's going to, I think, make that more fluid. And it's something we have to watch and we need to be competitive with here in the west coast of the U.S.
Thank you very much, John. And I want to thank, before I turn over everything to Noel, I just want to thank our panelists for not only your presentations, but for being so candid in your answers.
And thank you, Bill, for always actually exceeding the expectations with your questions and your candor as well. Well, ladies and gentlemen, a big thank you to all of you who are here, and for those of you tuning in, I would also like to extend a hearty thanks to the people that brought this event to you, our Port of Long Beach staff, in particular our trade and communication staff members. Yes. And one last round of applause for our distinguished panel. And this officially concludes our program. See you next year.